Hello and welcome back to Blue Flag Bandits, the series that drives F1's worst cars since 2010, so you don't have to, in the often desperate hunt for points. And we're here in Spain once again, testing out our 2016 drive, the Manor MRT05. We arrive in 2016 after our best season yet in this series, driving the McLaren MP430 as Jensen Button for F1 2015 reasons. We scored more points in both the drivers and constructors titles than we have in Blue Flag Bandits. We took pole positions, podiums and points while battling some crazy AI dive bombs. We only failed to score 5 times all season, with at least one of those down to the aforementioned dive bombs, and we had decent pace pretty much all season. We ended 2015 on 88 points, and thanks to Alonso picking up his own podium, McLaren ended on 115 points, setting a new high bar. Nico Rosberg would pick up his title a season earlier than in real life, claiming a couple of rounds to spare, beating Hamilton by over 2 race wins, with Vettel once again following in third, while Mercedes, of course, claimed the Constructors' crown ahead of Ferrari, while Williams beat Red Bull into third, the Milton Keynes outfit slipping further down the pecking order as the Renault engine lost out to the Mercedes and Ferrari. After that brief look back at 2015, 2016 was another season of fairly static technical regulations, with the only minor changes being that cars had to be designed with a separate wastegate for exhaust gases to improve the sound of the cars, after criticism of the turbo hybrid regs. The FAA also opted for an increased number of power unit tokens, after initially reducing the number to 15, but with Renault and Honda struggling, particularly Honda, to keep up with the other engine manufacturers, teams were given 32 engine power unit tokens to use to develop the engines over the course of the year. The sporting regulations saw major changes to the qualifying format as a progressive knockout format was introduced just 2 weeks before the season began. While qualifying would still hold the 3-part setup, the slowest driver would be eliminated after a certain amount of time until the relevant number of cars were eliminated in each session. Fans, teams and drivers would be heavily critical of this format, and thankfully it's not implemented in F1 2016 again, and it would be dropped by the Chinese Grand Prix, reverting back to the format used since 2006. The number of pre-season tests was also dropped, down to 2, both held here at Catalonia, while Pirelli would introduce another compound of tyre, the Ultrasoft, with each compound of dry tyre being used during races, rather than just selecting an option or a prime. It gave more varied strategy. You'd have Ultrasoft, Super Soft, Soft, Hard, Medium runners all at once, at times. While in the stewards' room, these stewards were given more power to issue penalties for track limits breaches, so we began to see more off-track lap deletions and penalties for going off track too many times. The driver market was a little less explosive in pre-season than the season prior, aided by the fact that Haas entered the sport, bringing the number of cars up to 22. Mercedes, Ferrari, Williams, Force India, McLaren and Sauber would all retain their driver lineups, with McLaren having to make one change at Bahrain after Alonso sustained an injury in a major accident in Australia. Stoffel Vandoorne replaced the Spaniard. Red Bull and Toro Rosso would begin the season with the same driver lineups, But after the Russian Grand Prix, Kvyat would be dropped to Toro Rosso and replaced by Max Verstappen in a straight swap between the two teams, marking the start of Helmut Marko's villain arc. Manor would also make a driver change after 12 races, dropping Rio Haryanto for Esteban Ocon, the Frenchman partnering with rookie Pascal Wehrlein, who drove for the team all season. Lotus would completely replace their driver lineup with former McLaren reserve driver Kevin Magnussen and their own reserve driver Jolyon Palmer, replacing Maldonado, who would leave the sport, and Romain Grosjean, who moved to Haas as part of the returning Esteban Gutierrez. The calendar was expanded to 21 races, the most it had ever been, the German Grand Prix returning at Hockenheim, while the European Grand Prix would return for one season, as Azerbaijan joined the calendar with Baku City Circuit. It ran under the European Grand Prix name for just one season, before becoming the Azerbaijan Grand Prix from 2017 onwards. As mentioned previously, Haas would join the field to bring the grid up to 22 cars and 11 teams, with only one other change, as Renault returned as a manufacturer, buying out the struggling Lotus team to run them as a factory outfit from 2016 until they became Alpine later on down the line. Manor would drop their Mauritia branding while also switching their engine supply to Mercedes, but there were no more changes to the teams until the end of the season, when Manor would eventually succumb to their financial problems and exit Formula One. That leads us quite nicely on to the Manor Racing Team MRT05, the fifth and final car from Banbury after their multiple name changes since the Virgin Racing entry in 2010. The final of those new teams to remain on the grid would arrive on the grid a little better position than they had in 2015. They weren't bought out at the last minute and just barely survive, mostly. Their new engine supply from Mercedes, providing Mercedes DTM champion Pascal Wehrlein alongside Indonesia's first and so far only F1 driver Rio Haryanto, though he would be replaced after the Belgian Grand Prix by another Mercedes protege in Esteban Ocon due to ongoing financial reasons. The MRT05 was a far superior machine to those that had come before, with the previously mentioned Mercedes engines and technical partnerships with the likes of Williams, but they would still find themselves mired at the back of the field, fighting with Sauber and Renault. The team would score only their second points finish in their history in Austria, Wehrlein taking 10th place, which, with 2 races left, places them above Sauber and on course for much needed prize money, with only obviously the top 10 teams receiving part of the prize pool. However, in a mixed condition Brazilian Grand Prix, NASA took 9th for Sauber, condemning Manor to 11th in the Constructors, and effectively confirming their fate before the season ended, ironically costing Felipe Nasr his F1 future, as he'd agreed to drive for Manor in 2017. Nico Rosberg would finally beat Lewis Hamilton to the championship in a fiery tussle to the final round of the season, one that was so draining that Rosberg promptly retired from F1 within a fortnight of season's end. The Mercedes pair would only be beaten twice all season, both times by Red Bull, with Ricciardo and Verstappen taking 1 win each, the pair ending the season 3rd and 5th in the standings, separated by Sebastian Vettel. Mercedes would take another Constructors' Championship, nearly 300 points clear of Red Bull, who had an improved season, finishing comfortably ahead of Ferrari, while Force India would jump Williams, with McLaren catapulting themselves up to 6th, ahead of Toro Rosso, Haas, Renault, Sauber and Manor. For the third time in this series, we start the season knowing that by its end, the team would be no more. So we have to try our best to give them some good times before we never ever see them again. We're also going to have to lower the bar that we set in 2015. The McLaren was a welcome break from the grind of previous years, but the pre-season event here in Spain, as you can probably see, showed that we're going to really have to be able to take advantage of strategy to try and score some points, as pace certainly is not on our side. We'll be running 50% races as usual, and we've stuck to legendary AI rather than springing for the ultimate AI option that F1 2016 holds. We'll also still have traction control rules and flags on as we've had through the series so far, just because it takes an awful lot to try and relearn these games in a very short space of time. We'll also be fighting, once again, with Sauber, and this time Renault in terms of the stand-ins, though we were able to mix it with the likes of Haas and McLaren, as you can see on screen, in this pre-season event, so we would expect to see them through the season fairly regularly. Once more onto the breach then, as we head back to Banbury for one last hurrah for the plucky Manor racing team, knowing that last season is likely to have been an outlier in our misery. But we're nothing if not resilient, so we'll give it our best to allow this team one more shot at glory and see if we can at least grab some points before Manor fall by the wayside in Formula 1.